Welcome, I'm George Benaroya. Let's talk now about the Bitcoin. And the idea with this is to give you a fairly objective view of what Bitcoin is, to basically show you the pros and cons. We'll cover what is Bitcoin, how we can use Bitcoin or cryptos in general to transfer money as an investment, the risk that you have when you deal with crypto and fraud. And finally, what I found when I visited El Salvador, the first country to use Bitcoin as legal tender. What I highly recommend that you do is to just stop the recording for a few seconds, scan this QR code, and then respond to two questions. The first one is, will you use Bitcoin to send cash? And the second one is, will you invest in Bitcoin? At the end of the recording, I'll show you the responses from every attendee, including yours. And you will see that there is a difference. So we're going to go through the process of asking the same questions again. So if you want, you can stop it now and then respond to those questions, and then we'll continue. Imagine that we were to explain Bitcoin, say, to your mom or my mom. Well, we could go into some very basic concepts. The first one will be, what is Bitcoin? And I will say that these are lines of computer code. How do we make Bitcoin? And anyone can make Bitcoin, but it's expensive and cumbersome. The original idea was that people will be able to send Bitcoin to each other without any intermediaries. But we have learned that that is actually quite cumbersome. So to try to solve all these problems, wallets were invented, and I'll explain what that is. But basically, those are financial intermediaries, which are making it easier for you and I to send money to each other. The transaction fees turn out to be very expensive, you will see, because they are efficiency driven. And then we'll go through the boring part, like what is block and blockchains and so on. When I first learned about the Bitcoin idea, I really loved the concept. About 6 years ago, I read in the Wall Street Journal that Bitcoin will allow any two people anywhere in the world with just a computer and an internet connection to send money to each other without any middlemen. I don't mind middlemen or banks at all, because in my opinion, they provide a good service. But I do mind that sometimes countries put restrictions to the transfer of cash. That could be Venezuela or Cuba or Argentina in Latin America. If you think about it, most people out of the 7 billion are honest, hardworking people. And yeah, there may be a few, let's say 30 million people or so who are corrupt or thieves or whatever. But the problem is that many times in the banking system, we make it hard for 99.9% of the people, the ones who work real hard to get their cash. And we put all these restrictions in the movement of capital because of just a few. So that is one of the issues that Bitcoin theoretically was going to solve. Now, you'll see that in reality, it didn't work quite well. When I first bought Bitcoin just to test it, I was going to Tokyo about 6 years ago, and I figured, well, since in Japan they're well advanced, I will buy Bitcoin on PayPal and then I will use it there. When I got to Japan, I realized that I was unable to spend my Bitcoin. And we'll talk more about that. So altogether, the idea of any two people anywhere in the world being able to send money to each other without restrictions, I think is a terrific idea. And maybe we can try to keep the good parts of this concept. What is all this about the crypto part? Well, crypto just means secret in Greek. And in the companies where I work, we encrypt messages related to salaries or HR issues, or the companies who are buying and selling, called mergers and acquisitions or M&A. So the crypto part, there is nothing fancy about it. If you use WhatsApp, that is encrypted. So it's part of the process, but it's nothing really out of this world. Something very that is used very frequently. What is Bitcoin? Well, one definition could be lines of computer code that some people regard as money or an asset. What is money? A few years ago, I learned that in the Micronesian island of Yap, they consider these stones, or they used to be money. So I flew from Switzerland to Tokyo to Yap and went around and talked to people, and Yap, I said, okay, so this is worth $10,000. Now, nowadays with NFTs, the concept that this is worth $10,000 doesn't look that weird, because some folks believe that the value of a photo or a picture is also worth thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the academic definition of money, we're going to leave it on the side. But what we want to do is whether we can use Bitcoin to send money to each other, and how expensive it will be when we try to do that. Now let's talk about mining or making Bitcoin. So the idea was that anyone could make Bitcoin. You just needed a computer, and then you will be solving a mathematical puzzle. Now, what is important to learn is that this is, by definition, a lottery. One analogy that I learned that I think is quite effective is that imagine that you have a 1,000-sided dice, and you roll the dice, and every 10 minutes there is a winner. Now, if there are more people playing this game, the rules get automatically adjusted so that every 10 minutes and only every 10 minutes, there is one and only one winner. Now, the more players that you have in this lottery, the harder and harder it gets. But it wouldn't make any sense for you to use a supercomputer to do this, because all you're doing is rolling a dice. Now, originally, every 10 minutes, the reward that you were getting was back in 2009, 50 Bitcoins. But every 4 years, the reward gets reduced by half. So it was 50, 25, 12 and a half, and now it's at 6.25. Now, there will be only 21 million Bitcoins ever minted, but the last Bitcoin, because of this mathematical rule, will be made or minted in over 100 years, by 2140. Now, the problem that we have is that in reality, you will have to mathematically keep your computer operating for years and years before the statistical chance is there that you will get this reward of getting the Bitcoins. So overall, it's very complex and expensive for most people. Miners typically use computers with special microchip that basically what it does is good at just rolling a dice or doing something that is purely mechanical. There is nothing regarding being smarter at it. And usually these computers are set in countries where the cost of energy is very low. So this is an example of someone doing it in Argentina, where the rates are artificially low. What we see is that all listed companies that are minting Bitcoin lose money. Now, in the next chart, we're going to see the countries where Bitcoin is being produced. And this one was China. Now they changed the rules, and so they're not there anymore. The US has a bit, but the electricity is relatively expensive. So people tend to make it in other countries where electricity is cheaper. One of the major problems that you have with Bitcoin is that when you have all these computers trying to make Bitcoin, the noise will drive you nuts. This is an article from the Wall Street Journal where they were saying that this is like having a giant dentist drill that won't stop 24/7. And what many of these companies do is they go into rural areas here in the US where people are not that sophisticated. And then they get a permit to be able to put all these machines. And then when the neighbors realize what they have done, they want to kick them out and they're unable to. So the damage to the local communities in terms of this unbearable noise is quite great. And there is an article in the Wall Street Journal that you can click to learn more about it. The second problem that we have is that you have up to, for example, 1 million computers, right, trying to make this Bitcoin or to authorize the transactions, and I'll explain that later. So it would have made a lot more sense to say, okay, let's have 1,000 computers so that it's still at random, that every 10 minutes we'll get a Bitcoin, but not 1 million, right? It just doesn't make any sense. There is 1 million computers trying to get a Bitcoin and only one will get it. So the cost in terms of energy of having all these computers trying to do the same thing is nowadays more than the energy use in a European country like the Netherlands. That is the amount of electricity that is being used. Now, some Bitcoins fans would say, well, but that's not a problem because we could use renewable energy. But the economist counter argues that, well, but you could use that renewable energy at a hospital or at a school. So there are better ways to use all this energy that is being wasted. And now let's get into the concept of wallets. So the original idea was that any two people will be able to mint or make the Bitcoin and then send it to each other. But soon we realized that it's rather complex to go through all the steps that you have to have in order to send money to other people. And so financial intermediaries were created, and they have received the name in crypto of wallets. A wallet is very similar to a bank account, where what you do is you will put your Bitcoins in this wallet, and then it's easier to send money to each other. So if the people have the money in the same wallet, like if it was the same bank, then it's even faster and the transaction fees are lower. And if they don't have it in the same wallet, they have it in a different wallet, like if it was a different bank account, then it will take a bit longer and the transfer fees will be higher. So by definition, one of the concepts is that the way Bitcoin works, when you make a transaction, like when you make a payment or when you transfer Bitcoins, that transaction has to be settled by all these computers that work in the network. And that only happens every 10 minutes. So imagine that you're at this store. I was here in El Salvador and you try to make a payment, but gotta wait 10 minutes. Then you will have every person behind you waiting in line for 10 minutes so that you can make a transaction or make a payment. That wouldn't work, right? So these wallets have a different system that will enable them to approve the transactions right away, right? But still, the concept in general is that the transactions will have to wait at least 10 minutes and the transaction fees are very high, as you will see later on. On this chart, we see the transaction fees or transaction cost when we transfer or when we make transactions with Bitcoin. If you look at it, during peak times, it can exceed $25 US dollars, that is. And in general, it's about $3 or so. So if you're making a transaction for $1, why would you pay $4 for it? And in general, what you will see is that there are economies of scale that these wallets are able to achieve, but still as a percentage, the transaction fees are very high in the use of crypto in general, right? Bitcoin in particular. Now let's look into some of the terms that people typically use. So we said that Bitcoin, one definition could be that it's computer code that some people regard as money. Now, the process to create and audit the code is cumbersome and difficult. And to buy, sell, or transfer Bitcoin, we need something called a wallet. All these transactions that are made with Bitcoins are called blocks, like when you buy, sell, and you register who was buying things and who was selling things at what time and so on. And they get all grouped together and they become a blockchain. The beauty of this blockchain is that it's publicly available. Anyone can look at it. Now, the good news is that instead of seeing a name or the name of the buyer and seller, you will just see numbers. So I wonder why in the adult entertainment industry, they're not, using Bitcoin as much as they could have. Because think about it this way, that's probably a transaction that many spouses wouldn't like their other spouse to see. And so although the ledger will be public and anyone will be able to see, all what they will see is a username, a set of numbers doing a transaction, which will be another set of numbers from a store, which is another set of numbers. So in that sense, it's quite good to protect the identity of the users. Now, if you are a thief, we will see later on is that you will get caught. So it's not true that we are unable to decipher who the actual people in reality are. There are some real good articles. In my opinion, the Wall Street Journal and The Economist have done a real good job at explaining all these things. And here you see the articles that you can Google and read or watch in the case of the videos. They explain things quite well there. In the class that I teach at NYU, the graduate finance class, one of the concepts that we follow is that we learn by doing. So we do things ourselves. And this semester, 26 students took part of a process where we created a blockchain. There are by now about 200 questions, which are all aggregated in a public ledger that anyone can see. And each one of the records, like for example, the name of a student coded, right, with this idea of numbers or usernames, at what time the question was recorded, who read the question, who made comments to the questions, and so on. We followed the entire process of Bitcoin, and the reward for the students was, instead of Bitcoins, extra credits. But it's a public ledger with about 2,111 records as of now that anyone can have access to and see it because it's public, just like Bitcoin and these ledgers are. Now let's look into two different things. The first one is, let's look into Bitcoin to transfer money, to send money to each other, which was the original idea. And let's think about international transfers because they typically tend to be more costly and time-consuming. I travel a lot. I've been to 193 countries by now, and I use public transportation sometimes to talk to people, to meet people. And one of the things that sometimes I hear is that there will be immigrants around the world, some of them not fully documented. And what they tell me is, to my question is, well, how do you save or where do you keep all the cash you save? And they keep it in cash because they are afraid to go to a bank institution and deposit the cash. In the US, it's very easy. Anyone can do it, even if you are an illegal immigrant. However, people are worried about doing that, right? About going to a bank and showing their IDs and so on. And the problem that I have with that is that if that money that they have earned by working hard for years gets stolen, they lose all their savings. So ideally for me, we need to find a way to make these banking facilities available to everyone. And Bitcoin was supposed to do that. But now imagine that you're Maria, this lady here on the photo. And let's say that Maria wants to send $300 to her mom. And I was inspired to make this story because I was recently in Europe, and there is one store that you'll see later on photos where they tell me that, you know, many of their consumers are folks working in Europe that are sending money to their parents back home in El Salvador. But now let's look at how much it will have cost Maria to send $300. Well, in the US, we have a number and she will be charged, as you see here, 2.3% to buy the Bitcoin. Now, the price that she's going to pay is going to be relatively high. So when you think about a currency, forget about Bitcoin, think about that you're buying euros or pounds or pesos or Japanese yen. What you always want to look to find out whether you're being charged a pretty bad fee is the spread, which is the difference between the buy and sell rate. So when I took this photo, Bitcoin was at about 42,000 euros, but it was being bought at this store for 40,000 and sold for 45,000. So the delta or the spread here is 10%. So that's when you're losing when you buy a currency in an exchange house, right? In this case, it's a real bad fee. You're losing 10%. The least you will lose if you do it in the US, in a good wallet and so on, will be about 1%. So you lost 2.3% here. Let's say that you lost 5% on the exchange rate. And then when her mom goes to change that Bitcoin into real money, into dollars, at an ATM that they have in El Salvador, she will have paid a fee of 5%. So once you add all the fees, some of which are hidden, the total cost for Maria to send her mom $300 and for her mom to be able to use those $300 will be about 10% or 30 US dollars. Now, the other thing that she could do, Maria, is she could give her mom a debit card. In the US, we have debit cards with a number of brokerage houses which provide a full refund for ATM fees anywhere in the world. The exchange rates are the best exchange rates. These are the wholesale exchange rates. You don't have to keep a minimum balance at all. There are no annual fees. And you get all the benefits, basically. Some of these are Schwab and Chase Sapphire card, although on that one you have to keep a higher balance. By the way, I receive no commissions or kickbacks or rebates from any of the companies that I ever mention on all my notes and articles and so on. But this one is pretty good, yeah, because you get a full refund and you don't have any fees of any kind. So here's me withdrawing money in Peru, and I was withdrawing about $34, and I was charged a fee by the ATM of $7.24, which was refunded in full, as you see here. So let's think about it. The fee to use it, zero. The foreign exchange fees, zero. And the refund on ATM fees in full. So her cost, if she was to give her mom a debit card, will be zero. Now, the other thing that she could do is to use MoneyGram and or Western Union. In the old days, they used to kill us with the transfer fees. They used to be very hard, but they had to adapt to blockcoin and competition and so on. So today, and if you had access to these slides, you will see that I always put the links so that anyone can go and check the details of each one of the numbers that I show. Today, if you were to use, or if Maria was to use MoneyGram to send money with a bank account, even though she's using MoneyGram, her cost will be zero, nothing. And if she was to use a debit card or going and have her mom pick it up in cash and so on, her fees will be $2, $5, at most $11 with Western Union, which is the most expensive. So the total cost will be somewhere between zero and at most, with Western Union, which is the most expensive one, $11. So let's try to summarize it. If we use Bitcoin, the cost will be $30. If we use a debit card, zero. And if we use MoneyGram or Western Union, somewhere between $0 and $11. Net, to transfer $300, Bitcoin is very expensive. What if you want to transfer $1 million? Let's say that John is sending $1 million. Well, he will do the same thing, right? So he will have to go and buy Bitcoins. And the problem that you have when you go through these wallets here in the US is that you won't be able to send $1 million. They will force you to break it into smaller pieces. Their argument is risk and this and that. The outcome of this is that you pay higher fees. So these are the fees now from PayPal before I show you the other ones, and now this one's with PayPal. And you see that here you will pay about 1.5%, and then you will have the cost in the spread. And then you will have the cost when the other party is trying to use that money. So when you add all these fees, the hidden ones and the ones that you pay upfront, for $1 million, the cost will be about $10,000. So if we do the same thing that we did before, right, and we try to compare, we'll see that it's a lot more expensive. Now, imagine that John sends a wire. Now, when you get $1 million at firms like Fidelity Investments, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, and Chase Private, the wires you send are free. You don't pay a cent to send an international wire. And with the good banks, you're credited or received the same day. Now, if you don't have $1 million, you will be charged a fee, but the fee will be $50, not $10,000. So to try to summarize the fees, with Bitcoin to send $1 million, it would have cost to most of us $10,000, and with a wire somewhere between $0 and $50. There may be some people out there who have the sophistication or the systems to be able to significantly reduce this cost. But in my opinion, when we look at transactions in general, we have to see what most people will pay, not the exceptions, because I don't have access to be able to send $1 million on Bitcoin for free or at a very low rate of paying, say, only $1 or $2. And most of us, we just don't. We have to use one of these financial intermediaries, and the cost will be this high. Let's talk now about using Bitcoin as an investment. One of the things that we need to be mindful of it if we do want to take the risk of investing in Bitcoin is that the market, the stock market in general, things like the S&P 500 have dropped over the last 50 years or so by more than 50% once. Bitcoin, on the other hand, has dropped by more than 50% during the last 10 years, 8 times. This slide was made in May 2022, and just recently it dropped over 50% compared to the high last year again. And the problem that we have with Bitcoin is that depending on when you bought, you can either make or lose a fortune. Because yeah, if you bought it when it was at 362 and you didn't sell when it dropped at 326, or if you bought at 421 and you didn't drop when it sold for 178, or if you bought it at 311 and you didn't sell when it was at 210, or if you bought it at 20,000 and you didn't sell when it dropped by 5,000 to 5,000, sorry. But see, the problem is that we know based on research that what happens to us retail investors is that when this happens, we sell, right? Or at least most of us, because we are over worried, we panic, and so we sell at the lows. And many times we buy at the highs because one of the problems that we have is that the financial press, when things are going up, they find people to explain why things are going up. And when things are going down, they find people to explain why things are coming down. But they don't do the opposite, right? When things are going up, they don't have someone to say, listen, you got to worry because it's overpriced, and vice versa. So if, you didn't do any of these, or if you didn't buy it when it up to 67,000, 68,000, now today's at 29,000, then you could have made a fortune, right? When this chart was made on May 4th, it was 38,000. Now, about 3 weeks later, is at about 28,000. The other problem or the other risk that we have with Bitcoin is that depending on how old you are, you may remember that once upon a time, we all used Internet Explorer. We didn't use Google in the beginning. And Yahoo, once upon a time, was real important. The market value of Yahoo at one point in time was $110 billion, but then it dropped to 5. There was something called a Palm Pilot that I used to use. It was something like an iPhone before the iPhone, and it was worth $30 billion, and it dropped to 0. Compaq was the brand for computers, was worth $28 billion, and it dropped to 0. So Bitcoin has some issues, right? Some problems. The fact that it's not very efficient, and the energy use, and so on. And so there is a risk that Bitcoin, the good idea that Bitcoin is, will be replaced by something that is better. And then maybe it could become worthless. My biggest fear is not the fact that, I missed out and, I could have bought for this price and I didn't, because so be it, right? My biggest fear is FOBI, the fear of being an idiot. Because what will happen is that if I would have bought at 67,000, right, when it was dropping, and let's say that it goes all the way down and continues to go down, people will ask me, oh, but didn't you see it, that it was coming down? And didn't you see all the press releases and so on? And how will I explain that? Yeah, no, but I fear it was going to come back up again. So in my case, I am not worried about missing out, right? About not being able to identify companies or financial instruments that will increase in value a lot. I am more worried about the FOBI. This is a chart showing as an example Yahoo once again. So, at one point went up to 120 billion, and then it dropped drastically time after time with some ups and downs, right? But how will you know that it was going to come down and not to go up, come down and not to go up and then go down? Definitely. You will hear some people saying, well, but even if that was the case, the fact is that, you could have bought Bitcoin and you will have made 100 times the amount of money that you invested. So what we have done in this chart is we have compared a number of investments, not at the very, very beginning, because then very few people have access to it, right? You will only have access if you were a friend of a founder of Apple or Amazon and so on. And the same with Bitcoin, right? So we look at it after a few years when more people would have had access. And yeah, if you would have bought Bitcoin for $400, you would have made 100 times your investment. Well, not now, because now it's at 28,000, but when these slides were created. So fine, 100 times, but how about Facebook? With Facebook, you will have made 500 times the value. With Apple, you will have made 350,000 times the value. With Amazon, you would have made 18,000 times the value. And the company managed by Warren Buffett is called Berkshire Hathaway. I'm an investor, a long-time investor in that company, and not from the very beginning when it was launched for about $1,400, and now it's worth, oops, it doesn't fit. Let me rearrange the scale. There we go. So now it's worth $500,000. So there are many other investments where you would have made, compared to investing in Bitcoin in the very beginning, a lot more money. If we look at Bitcoin and we agree that this is a lottery, right? Well, then there are other investments that you could have made that would have made more money. So we're looking here for companies that have a market cap or a value of over $5 billion. And when you see that, whereas Bitcoin dropped now by over 50% at the time I'm making this recording, these other companies increase by well over 50%. Let's look now at what happens when someone hacks your account. The net concept is that if someone hacks one of these crypto accounts, you're out of luck. So in the largest hacks, somewhere between 250 million and 500 million was stolen. And there is no protection whatsoever. If you go back and you read articles from a few years ago, they were talking about this Mt. Gox that was the market leader. It was based in Tokyo and so on. And someone took out all the Bitcoins and there was nothing that they could do. The difference between crypto and you having a deposit at a bank or even owning stocks is that in those cases, you are protected. If someone steals your cash, you're protected by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The same if the bank goes bankrupt. And if something happens to the stocks that you own and the stocks get stolen, not depreciate, but get stolen, then you are also protected by the SIPPC. You have no protection when you own Bitcoin. And then there's this idea that Bitcoin is untraceable and completely anonymous and so on. And I like the way that the Wall Street Journal has used for the headline, right? Saying that untraceable Bitcoin is a myth, right? So some of the people who stole a lot of money, in this case, billions of dollars, they got caught. So the FBI and the government is able to trace it back and to find out who these people are and to put them in jail. Now, the little tiny problem that we have with a small amount, if it gets stolen, is that our name will just be added to a list and it's not going to be a priority for the police to find out who stole the money from your account or my account. So it's not true that Bitcoin is untraceable. From all the people who have got arrested lately, we are able to see that Bitcoin is traceable, but we also have to realize that if something happens and our Bitcoin gets stolen, we are pretty very much out of luck. Let's go now into the last part, and let's talk about what happened in El Salvador. So El Salvador is the first country to make Bitcoin legal tender. I went to El Salvador a few weeks ago to learn how it was going. First, let's say two things that El Salvador did well. One was to put ATM machines where you can basically convert your Bitcoin to real money that you will need to use to buy groceries. That is the dollar, the US dollar in El Salvador, and they're all over the place. Now, the little tiny problem is that you have to pay a fee of 5% when you do that. But still, it's a good thing that they put the ATM machines. And the second thing that they did well was to put all these people to explain to consumers what Bitcoin is. So this stand is right across from the cathedral in downtown in El Salvador, and you see these folks which look like normal people explaining to other normal people how Bitcoin works. In my opinion, this is great. Now, when I visited El Salvador, I met some pretty high officials, which I'm not allowed to mention, and bankers, and had very nice dinners and lunches and so on. And then I did what I always do, and that is to get into public transportation to meet real people. So I took these photos myself. This is me, using public transport to talk to people, and I spoke to all these folks. This lady, you will see if you go into my YouTube channel, is the one that we saw before, and she'll tell you how she feels about Bitcoin. Net, she'll say, "Niet." Now, some of the folks here make $10 per day, they work per day. And the government has a system where if you get an account, a Bitcoin account, right, they will give you for free the equivalent of $30, which is the amount of money that you have to work 3 days to make. So if they're giving away so much money, why wouldn't everyone go and get it? And some of the reasons that I heard was something so simple like that the government forces you to take a selfie of yourself when you create the account and so on. And so they're worried. Some of these folks told me, they were ladies, about what are they going to do with my photo? And in general, in many of the accounts that are created around the world, the different institutions with the argument that they have to follow rules called know your customer, they ask people for all this information, right? Like a bank account and this and that. And the whole idea of Bitcoin was that you were not going to do it. So we're going to be doing something that we said we weren't going to do it. In addition to that, people are afraid, right? So Bitcoin may go up, but it may also go down. So when we ask people in El Salvador, less than half of them like the concept and agree with it. The folks who are here in this bus, they didn't. The other thing that I did was to go and test whether it's true that because it's legal tender, it was accepted everywhere. No, it wasn't. I went to a mall, a shopping mall, which tends to be, where prices are more expensive. So you will think that you're going to be much more likely to be able to make payments with things like Bitcoin. And in none of these stores, they took or they accepted Bitcoin. Not in Burger King, not in Victoria's Secret, or any of these stores. Now, there were some where they did accept it, but when we tried to use it, because my Bitcoin was in a US wallet called Coinbase, we were unable to make the transaction. It just didn't work. So we waited, in the case of this store that you saw before, some 15 minutes, and the cashier was trying to make it work, and people in El Salvador, they're not like in New York City. So all these people were, waiting in lines behind me, and they didn't complain and so on because they're from El Salvador, not from New York. But we couldn't make it work. It just didn't work to be able for me to make a payment with coins, Bitcoins that were in a US wallet. Now, if a transaction would have gone through, this was a transaction for $1, which was not approved, right? But the transaction fees would have been 34%. And I keep receipts of everything, right? So here you will see that this is a transaction being made with Coinbase for Bitcoin for the payment of $1, and the fees would have been 34 cents or 34%. So net, it turns out that it's very expensive, as you saw earlier on, and in real life for us to use Bitcoin. Now, in El Salvador, people use a local wallet that you're only able to get if you're a local, and then they avoid completely all these fees. But when someone who is not a local tries to use it, it just doesn't work. So what do you think now? If you were to scan the QR code and respond to the same two questions that I asked in the very beginning, and the questions are, will you use Bitcoin to send cash? And will you invest in Bitcoin? I'd appreciate it if you do scan the QR code and you respond. That way I get more answers from more people. And what I would like to show you now is, before the recording was made, how people have responded to these two questions before seeing the presentation and after. Before seeing the presentation, basically 1/3 of people said that they would use Bitcoin to send cash. After this presentation, that was reduced by 2/3. It went from 34 to 10%. Regarding whether they will invest, it was reduced by half. Before the presentation, it was 70%, and after the presentation, it was 37%. So net, I think that is important for people to learn about Bitcoin. I think that Bitcoin should be available for people to use. For different charity organizations that I support or stores that I work with, I do help them accept Bitcoin so that they can increase their sales or their donations. But what we have to do is we have to educate consumers on the risks that Bitcoin entails. If you go to the page, my NYU, New York University homepage, you will see more information on the public ledger. You can just Google my name and it will appear. And then if you search for my name on Medium, you will see also this material. And you can also go into my YouTube channel and get more information and a copy of this recording. So with that, I thank you very much, and I hope this has been useful to you.